All right, this is an overview of PHP, MySQL, and forms, and it's called PHP, why, what, and how, because I'm going to address the why PHP, the what of PHP, and the how of PHP. So the question is, why should you learn PHP? Well, there's a lot of answers. Probably the number one is the opportunities it could provide. I did a search today on Indeed.com about the opportunities available for PHP developer. And as you can see, there are 9,548 jobs available. And if you look at the salary estimate over there, it goes from about 65,000 to 105,000. So lots of good opportunities available for PHP programmers. Now, you're not going to make $105,000 right out of the gate. That's going to be for a 2 or 3 year pro, but it's definitely worth pursuing. You should also learn PHP to understand some of the magic of the web that you take for granted. For instance, when you go to Amazon or Google, you simply type into a box and press search, and it finds books or other information that you would like easily, and it takes advantage of databases. So the operation of web forms and databases are made possible through PHP. So what exactly is PHP? Well, if you make a normal web request, you ask a server for a page and it returns it. Nothing too magical about that. You've already studied HTML. You know how to do that. But some websites, when you ask for information, they'll access a database. And then that database will send back information to you. And of course, you'll consume that information on the other side. PHP makes this possible. So the exchange between the server and your browser is HTML based. You've studied those tags, you know how to make that. The interaction between the server and the database is through a language called SQL, or structured query language. Okay. Now, just like liquids are either oil-based or water-based and the two don't mix, you do have HTML on one side and SQL on the other side, and they really don't mix. Each doesn't speak the other's language. But thank goodness for something called SOAP, because SOAP bridges the two worlds. Because if you look here at the diagram, this is actually a soap, bunch of soap molecules. And the inside with the tails, they will dissolve the oil-based stuff, and then the balls on the outside have a negative charge, a negative or positive charge. I believe it's a positive charge, and they will be dissolved in water so that they'll take the grease away from your body or whatever you're cleaning. So soap bridges the two worlds between oils and water. That is an excellent metaphor for what PHP is. PHP bridges the worlds of HTML and SQL and allows you to work interchangeably one with another. So how exactly does it do this? Well, if you want to work with PHP, you've got to get a server, because PHP resides on a server. And so when you get an HTTP request or a web request, that's received by a server, and the server tries to fulfill it. Oftentimes that request involves accessing a database. So, of course, you have to create a MySQL database. You could create other databases like Microsoft Server or some other databases, but MySQL is free, it's readily available, it's well documented, so you should probably just go with a MySQL database. That's what we'll use in this class. And third, you have to be able to build a form. If you build a form, that's how you form the request that you're going to ask the PHP to relay information from the server to you. So the request begins at the form, and it's a very simple HTML form. So we're going to give a very simple example tonight so that you get the concepts and not worry about complexity. You can build complexity later. Oftentimes you hear of LAMP or WAMP or MAMP, and I wanted to tell you what that means. So based on your operating system, it could be Linux, it could be Windows, it could be Mac. You have to have a server, and probably the most common free server software is something called Apache, and that responds to requests for pages. And then you have PHP, which resides on the server, and that's again the SOAP that works in both the HTML world and the SQL world. And then you have the MySQL database. Well, if you put those acronyms together, if it was Linux, it'd be LAMP. If it was Windows, it'd be WAMP. And if it was Mac, it'd be MAMP. So oftentimes you'll see in job advertisements or classifieds, or postings, it will say ability to work with a lamp stack or a WAMP stack or a MAMP stack, and that's simply being able to do what you're learning tonight. Your server options, we're going to use Cloud9. Cloud9 is available on the web. It's pretty easy to access. It's free. You could use other hosted systems like GoDaddy or other hosting sites online. There's a million of them. Or you could make your own laptop or own desktop its own server by installing something called Bitnami. It's a free product, but it installs a LAMP or WAMP or a MAMP stack on your computer. You can also get a product called MAMP server, and it's for Macs. The M obviously stands for Macs. And there are other products out there. There's WAMP servers, etc. So you could do that, or you could build your own. In other words, go get the individual components. But that tends to be a little bit tricky. Some of the details the other packages have taken away so that it makes it much more simple. So we're going to use Cloud9, and you all have a Cloud9 account, and you have a workspace that's based on PHP Apache. So something that we've done, but it's worth reviewing, is how to create a database. And then once you have a database, how to create a table in that database. So step one, from the Unix prompt, you just type mysql-ctl and then space CLI. So that's MySQL control and command line interface. You type that and boom, you get a MySQL prompt. That tells you that MySQL has loaded properly. Once you're in that prompt, any command that you issue should be followed by a semicolon. If you don't, then just follow a semicolon later. So the first in line 2, it says create a database. So we do that by using the verb create database, and I'm going to make a very, very simple interactive piece here. So I'm going to make a postal database. It's going to contain a table that has a zip code, a city, and a state. So it allows you to search for the zip code if you know the city and state, or you could morph it to do the reverse. But it's very simple. It's only going to have a couple of fields. Again, you can add complexity to your project. So we've created the database. Now, once you create a database, you've got to tell MySQL that you want to use that database. So in line 3, you see it says use postal, followed by a semicolon. Now, you may get an error if you don't say use postal, that it can't find a table that you're looking for. So just remember, you always have to say use in whatever database. So part B in line 3 is where we actually create the table. So we use the verb create table zip, and I'm calling it zip because I wanted to call it zip. You can call it anything you want to. And I put the name of the field, zip ID, and it's an integer field, int. It's going to be a primary key, which is I'm promising the database that all records will have a unique value in this field. And then I also do auto underscore increment, which tells the database, hey, could you take care of making sure all new records get a unique code and keep track of what the last code given was? I'd really appreciate it. So you're asking the database to do some work for you, which is great. Then I have a comma, which separates the one field from another. And the next field is called city. And it's going to be a variable number of characters up to 50, because I didn't really think a city would have more than 50 letters in it. And then a comma state, and I'm going to keep it to varchar 2, or you have to provide the 2-letter abbreviation for states. And then, of course, the zip code, and I called it code, and it's going to be an integer, because I'm not going to allow for the extended zip code, just the first 5-digit zip code. And I'm going to make it integers. That allows me to do some things with it mathematically that I couldn't do if I called it a string. Okay, so basically I've created a database called Postal. I've told the database I'm going to use that, and then I've created a table. Okay, now I'm going to insert some records into it. So I use the insert into verb. So insert into zip, and then I provide 2 of the 3 fields. I don't have to provide the first field, zip ID, because it was taken care of by auto increment. So I'm just going to say insert into zip city, comma code, and the values golden, because that's the city I'm interested in adding, and notice it's in quotes because it is a string. And then I have comma and then CO capital, because that's the abbreviation for Colorado. and then a comma, and then 80403, which is the zip code for North Golden, but it doesn't have quotes because it's a number. It's considered an integer. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a couple of other cities. I just added a couple of other cities by using the arrow keys to pull up the command after I've executed it, and then just change some things using the arrow keys back. So you want to make sure that you have a bunch of records in there. And then if you want to view all the records, number 5, we just say select asterisk from zip. And the asterisk means all the columns. So it says select all the columns from zip. Now remember, columns and fields are interchangeable terms. If I wanted to just see the records from Colorado, I would use something called a where clause. And in number 6, you can see it says select asterisk or all columns from zip, that's the table, where the state equals Colorado. Now notice that Colorado had to be in quotes. It can be single or double, it's not a big deal, but since it's a string, you have to use quotes. So here on this slide, I've just created a database and tables, inserted records, viewed all records, and viewed specific records. Okay, now on to creating the form. The HTML form is pretty easy. If you look right here, you can see in front of you the tags. It's pretty generic. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So you have the doc type declaration. You have an empty head, a set of empty head tags. You have the body that starts with a heading. It says find a zip code. And then it starts a form. Now the 5th line down says form and action equals. Now remember, whenever you press submit on a form, and you'll see down, a couple more lines, you'll see the input type submit value equals fine. That's a submit button. So when you click that, whatever is pointed to by that action attribute, it says action equals getzip.php. That is where all the information is going to be thrown. And then it says method equals get. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. I think we've talked about it before, but just for now, we'll let that slide. So we have the beginning form with an attribute action equals, and then the method. You have to have that if you're going to have an effective form. Then we have a prompt city with an input text box that we named city. We have a state and an input text box that we've named state. I put them within paragraph tags to keep them indented, and then an automatic line feed at the end, since a paragraph is a block level element. And then of course I ended the form with an input type submit. What a submit is it's a button, and when you click it, it automatically will send the form and its contents to wherever it's pointed to in the form action attribute. And then the value is just what the button is going to say. And if you look at the little picture in the upper right, that's basically what it's going to look like. It's going to have city box, state box, and find button. And that's it. Very simple HTML. Okay, so that form is what I call part of the throw. So you're going to take that data you collect from the user and you're going to throw it. You're going to throw it to the server. On the server side, the PHP is going to catch it. Then the PHP is going to use that information to create a SQL statement and then hit the database to ask for information. And it's going to take all the information it gets and run through it and send it back to the browser or the client that asked for it. So remember back in the form where we said action equals getzip.php? Well, we've got to write that. That's what catches it on the PHP side. See where it says PHP catch? The name of the file that catches it is called getzip.php. So this is what that file looks like. The first line, we're going to defer explanation until a little bit later. But before you can speak with the database, before you can ask a database to give you information, you have to log into it. You have to show that database that you have the right to get and read and write information to it. So we're going to show you that in a moment, but just assume right now that the include login PHP, what that does is it brings in that page that's on your website called login.php, and it incorporates it right where you put this include statement. So we don't see the code, we're going to see it in a moment, but that code will allow you to get permission to enter the database. But anyway, so right where we have the $_get and then in quotes city, we're asking the information that came over. We're asking for the information that's labeled city. And that's what the individual that filled out the form typed in the city text box. We're going to assign that to the variable $city. Now, all PHP variables have to begin with the $. Isn't that interesting? And so the next one retrieves the state variable. Now you notice that every line in PHP ends with a semicolon. It's going to cause a problem and an error if you don't have a semicolon at the end of each line. So in the first, in lines 2 and 3, we pulled city and we pulled state from the information that was sent to it by the form. Now in the next line where it says $SQL, we're assigning to that variable SQL a string that we're putting together. This is a SQL string. In other words, it's a query that will ask the database for certain information. So we have in quotes. Now it's very important that you know it starts with the double quote, and I'll show you why here. It says select code, because we were interested in the zip code, from zip where city equals, and in single quotes, the variable that pulled in the city. So we filled out the form, we typed in golden. If you look here, the line that says get city equals city, that assigned whatever we typed in this case golden, to the word city. So here it's going to actually dump out that word golden, but it's going to surround it by 2 quote marks. It's very, very important. And state equals, and in quotes, $state. Now remember, that's going to dump out the $state, which was CO. So basically, it's going to say select code from zip where city equals golden and state equals CO. Now that's assigned to the variable SQL, which is a PHP variable, so it has to begin with a $. And if you look at the next line where it says results equals MySQL underscore query, and that is a command to hit the database. That's the hit part. Whenever you say MySQL underscore query, whenever you perform a query, you're hitting the database. You're asking it for information. So the first argument is called link, and I haven't explained that because that comes from that login PHP script. But think of link as a ticket that gives you the right to speak to the database. So that's what login.php returns. It returns a ticket or a key so that we can talk to the database. But the second argument is that $SQL, which is what we put together to provide a SQL statement for the database. And remember, it's going to say select code from zip where city equals golden and state equals Colorado. So whatever the results of that that hit to the database are is going to be assigned to the results variable, $results. So think of it as it's asking for a bunch of information and the database spits all that information back. It could be nothing, it could be totally empty. But whatever it is stored in that results variable. And then we start a while loop. Remember, a while loop says while, and then it evaluates a Boolean condition, true or false. And then if it's true, it does what's within the braces below it. If it's false, it'll just skip it. So we have this compound command. We're assigning the variable $row equal to a fetch. So it says MySQLi or MySQL fetch assoc. It's an abbreviation for an associative array. So what it's asking is, hey, go to the database and make an associated array out of all the results you got back from the previous command. So the previous command, we threw in a query. It said select code from zip where city equals golden and state equals Colorado. And whatever the results were thrown into the variable results. Now we're saying, hey, pull out and organize from those results an associative array. Now an associative array, most arrays are numerical, so they have numerical indices. So for instance, if you had an array that was the letters A, comma, B, comma, C, all in quotes, element 0 would be A, element 1 would be B, element 2 would be C, etc. But you can also make an array that has what are called keys. So you can have an array that says names, and the key is, excuse me, well, let me start over. Instead of names, I should say class. So the class, it could have a name equals Bob, and it would be a gender equals male, and etc. So the name equals is a keyword. The gender equals is a keyword. So you can create an associative array based on the field or column names from your database. Now remember, in the zip database, we had city, state, and code. So when we fetch an associative array, the names, the key values for each of those columns are going to be city and state and code. And those are going to reside in row because we fetch an associative array from the results and we assign it to row. Now, if it's empty, if there's nothing there, row is 0, and a 0 is like false. So that Boolean would result in false if we didn't get anything, and so we wouldn't execute what's in the braces below because it's false. But if we get something, row is true because if it's more than 0, if it's a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, it's considered true. It's actually called truthy, 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 if it's a number but evaluates to true. Because it's not technically a true, it's truthy. In other words, it functions as if it were true. So we pull out from our results an associative array and assign it to row. And if there's something there, it's going to be true. So we'll enter the while loop. Now remember I said it's an associative array, so it has keys and values. So echo is PHP's way of printing, and I'm going to have it print the row that contains the code. So it's going to print, if there are results, it's going to print the zip code for Golden, Colorado. Okay. So I told you, if you look back here at the first line after the PHP declaration, which says include login PHP, we needed that file to get permission to speak with the database. So we're going to take a look at that now. Notice that we have a variable called $link, and that's our ticket, or that's our key to the database. It allows us to talk to it. If we don't get one, it's 0. If we get one, it's some number. Okay, so we definitely want some number. So we use the command mysequeli connect, and then we provide in order the server, and you will use on Cloud 9 what's called localhost, because the server is the same thing that's serving up the page that you've written. So localhost just means I'm using the server that this page resides on. So we're basically just use localhost. And then you provide a username, and you provide a password, and you provide a database name. Now in my situation, my username was Mr. W.D. Petrie. Yours is whatever you use when you log into Cloud9. Now password, you also use a password to log into Cloud9, but you shouldn't be using a password to log into MySQL. If you don't need a password for MySQL, you'll leave this blank. You do include the quotes, but nothing's between them. They're called empty quotes. It just means there's no password. And I don't know what you'll call your database name. I happen to call mine Postal. So in the last term there, I would type Postal. So username is whatever username is. Password, leave it blank, but make sure you have blank quotes there indicating a null string. And then whatever you named your database, you use that and make sure it's in quotes. So that's actually that line, MySQL connect, with localhost username, password, and database name, is basically a knock at the database's door. And the database will answer and look at all that information and find out whether or not you deserve a key or a ticket. If it does decide that you deserve a key or a ticket, it will return one, and that's going to be stored in that $link. If it decides you don't deserve one because you have the wrong password, you have the wrong database name, you have the wrong username, it will provide a 0, and the 0 is the same as false. Now look at the next line. It says if exclamation. Exclamation is a not character in PHP. What that does is it inverts everything. So if we were able to get in, the link is true. If we weren't able to get in, the link is false. But when you use an exclamation point, you flip it. So let's just say that we weren't able to get in because we used the wrong username. Okay, so link would be false. So now if, and then there's a Boolean condition and it says exclamation link. Well, remember, if we use the wrong username, link is false. But that exclamation flips it. So that suddenly becomes true. So you only enter that block if you didn't get a link, which makes sense if you look at the next line because it says unable to connect to MySQL, and then it exits, which is, it's not very elegant, but it just breaks it. So that's the way it works. So if you can't get a link, you get an error message and the whole thing shuts off. and then we return control back over to the calling program. All right, so that's login. So that allows us to get a link. Okay, so let me show you some context here. This is getzip. This was called by the form after we filled out the form. The first line after the PHP, the red PHP indicator, was include that login. So it goes over there, and it gets a link, and then that link is that variable is within the scope of this page. So you'll be able to access that link if you need it. And of course, you do need it here later on. So we get the values of city and state. We put together a SQL. We use the link and the SQL to do a query against the database. That's the hit. The results are stored in results. We run through them. That's why it's called a run in the while loop. All right. So there's that brief look at that login again. All right, troubleshooting. What if it doesn't work? What if this doesn't work? There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong, right? So if you look at it, we could have had the wrong username, password, or database. In the case of the login, because we have right here include login, if we run getzip and we don't get this message, unable to connect, that's no news is good news, because the only reason that we're going to get unable to connect is if we couldn't connect. If we don't get any message at all, notice that if we get the link, we're not going to see anything. Okay, so if we don't get the link, no news is good news. So then we're putting together a SQL statement, and then we're hitting the database. What could go wrong there? Well, what if we put together the SQL statement wrong? Okay, and then if we tried to get data that didn't, like for instance, we just had a syntax error, or we misspelled something, or somebody put a funky city like Xanadu in there. We don't have the zip code for Xanadu. We're never going to get any results. Okay, so there's some troubleshooting techniques for that. Okay, so let's see what some of those are. Um, they're all in red here. So basically, you can ensure that you caught something by echoing it out or printing it out. So in this getzip PHP code, we obviously assumed that we got the city in a get pull from the form, and we assigned it to the city variable. But we wouldn't know for sure unless we echoed it out. So we could echo city, and we could see that if we typed in golden, golden came out. If we typed in aspen, aspen came out, etc. We could do the same thing for state, but that would be a redundant explanation. So I just abbreviated this. And then the SQL statement we put together by concatenating or putting together the city and the state variables within the text of select code from zip where city equals and state equals. We can echo that out. We can echo out that statement, that SQL statement, and actually copy it from the browser, go over to Cloud9 and paste it in the MySQL environment and see if it pulls up the information we think it should pull up. If it doesn't, then the problem was your composition of the SQL statement. So you can try to troubleshoot it that way. And then if you're inside, see with the while where it pulls information as an associative array from the results, if we think that we should be going into that loop or those braces, we can echo out a statement that says, I made it here. In other words, if we run this and in our code we see that it says made it here, then we know we actually made it in there. And so that's another troubleshooting technique. All right, so what is your assignment? Your assignment is to do your own creation along the lines of what I just did. So you have a form and you have a database, and the form is used to pull up the database. Now, you can make it as complex or as easy as you want. You just can't use what I've used. Now, I'm going to go to Cloud9, and I'm going to show you this thing in operation, the program that I just showed you, so that you can get an idea what yours is supposed to do. You have wide open range. You can do a shoe database, a states database, flags database. You can do database of diamonds. You can do database of mixed drinks. You can do database of sports, players on the Broncos team. You name it. You just got to think of the fields and the data types that those fields would take so that you can um, create the table, and then you can insert records into that table. And then you'll have to design the form, obviously. And then I would go back over this recording and Just make sure that you understand the mechanics of what you have to do. But it's laid out pretty straightforward for you. Um, I'm going to go over here to Cloud9, and I apologize. There's a lot of wait time, but it gives me an opportunity to remind you of some important things that you want to do when you build this. So I'll go ahead and pull up my PHP demo workspace. This is where they try to get you to purchase because it takes less time to boot up if um, you're a premium member. Okay, so the form I called zip.html. So I'll go over there, and if you see this zip, it says right here, it says find a zip code, and then here's the city and the state text boxes. And then it gets thrown over to getzip.php. There's the catch piece. There's the SQL being built. There's the query, the hit, and then here's the run where we're running through the results. Here's the login where we have a local host. We have a username. Notice that it's a blank for the password. And then we have postal as the name of the database. Now, before I can get this running, I have to make sure that up here it says it's running, because if it's not running, it's never going to work for you. So you basically go over here, and the way you access this form, keep in mind it was zip.html. My workspace was PHP demo, okay, and then I do a hyphen and Mr. WD Petrie, and then I have .c9users.io, and then /, and I was in a folder called Summit, and then I was using something called zip.html. So if you run that, you see there's the form, and then I'm going to type golden, and I'm going to type CO, and then I'm going to submit it. And there it is. There's the zip code. Now I could have made it a little bit fancier, but for right now, um, we're just going to be basic. All right, good luck. Go ahead and text me, email me if you have any difficulties. I look forward to seeing what you're able to produce. Thank you very much.